As Nancy lights our chalice this morning, I invite you to stand as you are willing and able to speak our words of affirmation. They're on your program as well as are printed in the chat line. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship. So please.
It would have been easier for Rachel Carson not to write Silent Spring. In fact, she tried very hard to find another author to take on the job. Her mother had just died. Her eyesight was failing. She was undergoing radiation to treat her own growing cancer. And trying to unravel the intricate biochemistry of DDT and explain its dangers to a non-technical audience was going to be the toughest assignment of her life. She also knew that she would have powerful enemies ready to pounce on any error in her work as evidence that she was not qualified, that she was hysterical, a woman, and not to be taken seriously. And she doubted if the average reader was really that eager for the information that she was presenting. The chemical companies were accustomed to feeding the public little tranquilizing pills of half-truths, in her words, to maximize their profits and keep the customers satisfied. She was portrayed as an enemy of progress. The insecticide that she wrote about, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, was first synthesized in the 19th century, and it came into widespread use during World War II, when the army started using it to control malaria among the troops. But a temporary emergency measure then was quickly adapted for peacetime use. The World Health Organization initiated a campaign of global spraying in 1959 to knock out diseases spread by mosquitoes, as Americans welcomed the promise of better living through chemistry. Few people now or then would want to ban pesticides altogether. And in her book, Carson wrote, "No responsible person contends that insect-borne diseases should be ignored. The question that's now urgently presented itself is whether it's either wise or responsible to attack the problem by methods that are rapidly making it worse." Despite this sensible caution, one biochemist on the payroll of the American Cyanamid Corporation prophesied that if man were to follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the dark ages and the insects and diseases and vermin would again inherit the earth. A former US Secretary of Agriculture from the Eisenhower administration speculated on the basis of her good looks and unmarried status that Carson was undoubtedly a communist. But Carson's research was solid, and President Kennedy's Science Advisory Panel recommended a phase out of the poison. Somebody had to document the downside of DDT, which has been associated with breast cancer and spontaneous abortions and neurological disorders in children and malformed genitalia in boys. With her PhD in biology, Carson had the credentials required. Yet temperamentally, she was more poet than provocateur, more mystic than muckraker. If she became an activist, her social engagement grew from her heart, from her profound love of this world of stars and sunlight. If she was an agitator, it was not a role that she relished. As this godmother of the modern environmental movement once said, The gift she would impart to every child is an indestructible sense of wonder, glad appreciation of the everyday miracles of singing birds and silver rain, because it's not so important to know as to feel, she said. Wonder is inseparable from religion, which has been described as the oceanic feeling. Apart from creeds or dogmas or belief systems or institutions, religion is an experience of the eternal, the boundless, the unsearchable. And the ocean itself was where Rachel discovered that oceanic feeling, describing her sensations in books like The Sea Around Us. She wrote lyrically of exploring the beach at night, finding a small ghost crab in the beam of her torch, lying in a pit he dug just above the surf, as though watching the sea and waiting. I'd seen hundreds of crabs in other settings, but suddenly I was filled with an odd sensation that for the first time I knew this creature in its own world, that I understood as never before the essence of its being. In that moment, time was suspended. The world which I belonged to didn't exist. I might have been an onlooker from outer space. The little crab, alone with the sea, became a symbol that stood for life itself, for the delicate, destructible, yet incredibly vital force that somehow holds its place amid the harsh realities of the inorganic world. For Rachel, even a lowly crustacean could become a thou, a divine subject, rather than merely an object for study, a being to whom she might feel emotionally bonded and spiritually akin. She was one of the first nature writers to spin her yarns from the animal's point of view, as in her first title, Under the Sea Wind, where she followed the fate of a little sandpiper that she named Blackfoot on the annual migration from the Canadian Arctic to Patagonia, 12,000 miles away. To do that, she had to enter imaginatively into the bird's reality, asking, how does a breaking wave sound and look to sanderlings? For her, the ocean was never a desolate or lonely place, but one filled with soaring thoughts and enlightening companions. And yet, like the bird guided surely on its long flight, Rachel had a homing sense for truth, and her science was dead on. Her appetite for mystery never diminished her hunger for the facts. Fascinating, for instance, that over 60 years ago, Carson observed that now, in our own lifetime, we are witnessing a startling alteration of climate. The frigid top of the world is very clearly warming up. Without being able to pinpoint the precise cause, she reported on ice fields like Alaska's Muir Glacier, receding over 10 kilometers in the space of a dozen years. But she reasoned it must have something to do with the changing currents and warming water, calling the ocean the Earth's great thermostat. Hers was an intellect as restless and roving as the sea itself. Science and faith, at least a certain kind of faith, fit together in her way of looking at things, because both ask insistent questions about our universe. For religion, the riddles have no final solution. Whether there's a God, what happens when we die, why, there's something instead of nothing. These are perplexities that haunt the mind, and even without any definite resolution, can inspire awe. Science can tell us about the physics of the atmosphere or the dynamics of wave action, but can never tell us what makes the sunset beautiful or why the pounding surf stirs the soul. And yet religion needs science precisely to challenge our assumptions, to disrupt received opinion and conventional wisdom, driving knowledge to the limits of understanding so that we can all the more appreciate the vast extent of the unknown. In her essay, The Real World Around Us, she wrote that there's one quality that characterizes all of us who deal with the sciences of Earth and its life. We're never bored. We can't be. There's always something new to be investigated. Every mystery solved brings us to the threshold of an even greater one. Our particular faith is perhaps better at questioning our answers than answering our questions. So it was appropriate, as her own death approached, for Rachel Carson to request that her final farewell take place at the All Souls Unitarian Church in New York, where the minister, Duncan Howlett, had companioned her through her final illness. She wanted a simple ceremony without fanfare, with just her closest friends there. Sadly, her estranged brother seized control, and the official funeral was held at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., with U.S. senators for pallbearers and eulogies from an Episcopal bishop whom she'd never met. The following day, the more genuine, intimate parting took place in the Unitarian chapel, where the minister read from Rachel's own reflections, watching the flight of butterflies as they set out on a migration from which they'd never return. For the monarch, Carson mused, the cycle is measured in a known span of months. For ourselves, the measure is something else, the span of which we can't know, but the thought is the same. When the intangible cycle has run its course, it's a natural and not an unhappy thing when a life comes to its end. Not unhappy if the mind's been alert, not unhappy if the work's been real and useful, not unhappy if the heart is loved, not unhappy if we've lived with a sense of unquenchable curiosity, for then we might approach our last moments with a sense of gratitude for all that's been and wonder for whatever follows. Thanks for listening.